I was on my knees in the hallway of the swankest house I'd ever worked in, tools scattered around me like soldiers waiting for orders. When he showed up, sweat was running down the back of my neck as I wrestled with the rusty hinge that just wouldn't cooperate. "I think you might need this." I looked up and saw a glass of ice-cold water hovering in front of me, condensation droplets sliding over its surface like little shooting stars. The hand holding it belonged to a man who looked like he had stepped straight out of a design magazine. Christopher Jenkins, 34 years old, home repair specialist, and currently losing a battle against a stubborn door, I replied, accepting the water gratefully. My life followed a well-defined routine. I woke up at 5:30, drank strong black coffee, got into my white van with the Jenkins Home Solutions logo, and drove around the city fixing anything that was broken. Leaky faucets, windows that refused to open, floors that groaned underfoot. I was the guy people called when something in their home decided to rebel. I lived alone in a functional apartment on the west side of town. Nothing fancy, just enough for a guy who spent most of his time in other people's houses. My routine was as predictable as the sunrise, and I liked it just that way, until that Tuesday. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to leave your like. Every little bit helps so stories like this can keep coming your way. Robert Kincaid, 38 years old, interior designer. The owner of the brick mansion in the Oakwood Hills neighborhood had called the night before about a door that had warped after the last storm. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories with every detail you can imagine are available now. Check the link in the description right now. Do you always offer hydration to your service providers, or am I a special case? I asked, trying to sound casual as I downed the water in big gulps. Only to those who look like they're fighting a personal war with my door, he replied with a smile that lit up the hallway. Besides, this house has seen so many grumpy workers that it's refreshing to have someone to talk to. Robert's hair was carefully messy, and his eyes took in everything with genuine curiosity. He wore simple clothes, cotton pants and a navy blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, but you could tell they cost more than I made in a week. "The problem is the wood has expanded with the humidity," I explained, turning back to the door. "I'm gonna need to sand down the edge a bit so it closes properly. Should take another hour maybe." Instead of just nodding and disappearing like most clients, Robert sat down on the nearby step, watching me work. "Mind if I hang around? I'm curious about the process." I shrugged, though something about the way he was watching me made my heart race unexpectedly. "It's your hallway." While I worked, Robert asked about the tools, about how I'd learned the trade, about the strangest cases I'd faced. I answered with stories I'd told hundreds of times. The dog who ate a screwdriver, the old lady who mistook glue for door hinge lubricant, the couple who discovered a squirrel nest inside the wall. "You must see so many different lives pass by through this work," he commented, handing me a sanding block when he noticed I needed one. "It's like watching movies in fragments," I replied. "I only catch random scenes from people's lives. Never enough to understand the whole story." "And what scene do you think you're seeing of mine?" The question caught me off guard. I looked around at the impeccably decorated house, with furniture that looked contemporary, yet comfortable. Abstract art on the walls that somehow didn't seem pretentious. "A man who knows what he wants," I answered honestly. "Someone who values beauty and function in equal measure. Likely successful in his career, but not obsessed with status. And definitely someone who spends too much time watching workers fix doors." Robert laughed, a surprisingly warm sound that echoed down the hallway. "Guilty on all counts except the last. You're the first I've ever seen look at me that way." Our eyes met a second longer than necessary before I turned my attention back to the door. I finished the job an hour later, just as I'd predicted. The door opened and closed smoothly, as if it had never even known problems. "Perfect," Robert said, testing my work with admiration. "You make it look so simple." "Broken things usually just need someone who understands what's wrong," I replied, packing up my tools. "Most people give up way too easily when something doesn't work." "Interesting philosophy for a repairman." "Multi-skilled service provider," I corrected with a smile. "Repairman was what my uncle used to be in the 80s. Robert walked me to the front door, where the late afternoon light streamed through tall windows, turning the entry hall into a golden cathedral. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked as I was about to leave. "I just made a French press before you got here." In 10 years of freelance work, I had set some strict rules. Never socialize with clients. Keep a professional distance. Come in, fix the problem, and leave. It was simple and it worked. It avoided complications, misunderstandings, and most importantly, it kept work separate from pleasure. I opened my mouth to politely decline when I heard my own voice say, "Coffee would be great." Robert smiled as if he'd won some kind of secret bet with himself, and led me through the house to a kitchen that looked like it had jumped out of a decor magazine. White marble counters, dark wooden cabinets, stainless steel appliances that probably cost more than my car. "So, what made you start fixing things for a living?" he asked as he served coffee in handmade ceramic mugs. "I grew up fixing things," I replied, accepting the hot mug. "My dad had a workshop in the back of our house where we spent weekends resurrecting discarded appliances. Old TVs, radios, then computers. There was something satisfying about making things work again." "You really have skilled hands," he observed casually, although something in his tone made my cheeks warm. "And you? How did you decide you wanted to design other people's spaces?" Robert leaned on the counter, holding his mug with both hands. "I've always been obsessed with how spaces make people feel. My mom used to say I rearranged my room every 3 weeks when I was a kid. In college, I studied architecture, but I discovered I cared more about the interior than the exterior." There was something magnetic about the way he talked. Genuine passion, without pretense or affectation. I realized I wanted to know more, to hear more. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from our work to books, movies, places we'd visited. I learned that Robert had traveled extensively through Europe studying design, that he was allergic to strawberries, that he played piano in his spare time. I told him about my fascination with old motorcycles, my vinyl collection, my dream of someday having my own workshop. When I finally checked the clock, nearly 2 hours had passed. "Damn," I muttered. "I have another client in 20 minutes on the other side of town." Robert looked genuinely disappointed. Time flies when the company is pleasant. As he walked me to the door, he hesitated before saying, "I'm redoing my office upstairs, and I need some shelves installed. Do you do that kind of work too?" "Shelves are my specialty," I replied, feeling a wave of anticipation that I tried to ignore. "How about Friday? I can cook dinner as a thank you." Dinner. With a client. All my self-imposed rules were screaming in protest. "Friday sounds great," I heard myself say. For the next 3 days, I tried to convince myself it was just another job. That the fact I checked my reflection 4 times before leaving for work on Friday didn't mean anything. That the flutter in my stomach when I parked in front of the brick house was just hunger. On Friday, Robert opened the door wearing dark jeans and a gray shirt that made his eyes stand out. The smell of something delicious cooking filled the air. "Welcome back," he said with a smile that made something inside me shift slightly, like a lock finding the right key. The office that needed shelves was a cozy space with a large window overlooking the backyard garden. Books and design magazines were piled on every available surface. "As you can see, I'm desperate for some organization," he joked. I worked methodically, measuring and marking where the shelves would go. Robert sat in the corner chair, watching me while flipping through an architecture magazine. "Have you always been this focused?" he asked after a while. "What do you mean?" "You have this intensity when you work, like the rest of the world just disappears." I smiled, carefully drilling into the wall. My ex used to say I went into zombie mode when I was fixing something. Apparently she could have danced naked in front of me and I wouldn't have even noticed. "That would be a waste," Robert commented in a tone that made me blush again. The work went smoothly, and soon we were installing the last shelf. Robert came over to help, holding the frame while I fixed it to the wall. His fingers brushed mine briefly, sending an electric current through my arm. "Sorry," he murmured, though he didn't really seem repentant. When the last shelf was installed, Robert brought 2 glasses of red wine to celebrate. We looked at the finished result with satisfaction. 6 dark wooden shelves that perfectly complemented the space. "They're perfect," he praised. "Exactly as I imagined. I'm glad you liked it." We went down to the kitchen, where Robert had prepared wild mushroom risotto that smelled divine. The table was set with candles and cloth napkins, reminiscent of a high-end restaurant. "Do you cook like this regularly, or are you trying to impress me?" I asked as he served the food. "Both," he admitted with a smile. "Cooking relaxes me, but I also wanted to impress you. Is it working?" "Definitely," I replied, tasting the risotto that melted in my mouth. The conversation flowed easily again, but this time there was an underlying tension, a mutual acknowledgement that something was happening between us. Our eyes met a few seconds longer than usual. Our laughter lingered a bit. Our fingers occasionally brushed when passing bread or refilling the glasses. After dinner, Robert suggested we have another glass of wine on the back porch. The garden was lit with small strategically placed lights, creating an almost magical atmosphere. "This place is incredible," I commented, looking at the carefully trimmed trees and the small ornamental pond. "Did you create all of this?" "With the help of a landscaper, yeah. he replied, sitting close to me on the outdoor sofa. I wanted a refuge from the world. In my line of work, I'm constantly surrounded by people, expectations, deadlines. Here I can simply be. I get that, I agreed. It's like how I feel in my workshop. The world simplifies when I'm fixing something. Robert turned to look at me, his eyes reflecting the garden lights. What do you think is happening here, Christopher? The direct question caught me off guard. What do you mean? Between us. This push and pull. This energy. You feel it too, don't you? My heart raced. In my entire adult life, I had kept relationships compartmentalized. Work was work. Pleasure was pleasure. The lines never crossed. It was simpler that way. Safer. But there, under the stars in the garden of a man I'd only known for 4 days, all my carefully built rules seemed fragile and meaningless. I do feel it, I finally admitted. And it scares me a little. Robert smiled gently. Why? Because it wasn't in my plans. Because it complicates things. Because I hesitated, trying to find the right words. Because worlds like yours and mine rarely mix well. He leaned in slightly. Maybe it's time we tried a new mix. The aroma of the garden seemed to intensify as silence fell between us. Cypress and jasmine danced in the night air while I considered what Robert had just said. A new mix. Simple words loaded with the weight of so many possibilities. Are you always this straightforward? I finally asked, swirling the glass of wine between my fingers. Life's too short for codes and guessing games, he replied, his eyes fixed on mine. I'd rather be honest about what I want. And what do you want, Robert? He set his glass on the table between us and moved a little closer. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, mingling with the cool night breeze. I want to know the man behind the tools. The one who notices every detail, who understands how things work. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. I want to know if your hands are as skilled in other areas as they are at fixing doors. The air between us grew charged with something electric. My throat went dry, and I took a sip of wine to buy some time. The drink went down warm, heightening my already awakened senses. You're flirting with your service provider, I stated, trying to keep my voice steady. Robert smiled, without an ounce of shame. I'm flirting with Christopher, the man whose eyes analyze everything with precision and curiosity, the man who tells stories with his hands as much as his words. I set my glass beside his, eliminating the barrier between us. The garden now seemed to wrap us in a private cocoon, the dim lights casting dancing shadows around us. I've never been involved with a client before, I confessed. Then fire me, he suggested with a smile. Consider my tab closed. Now, I'm just a man who met another man and felt something he didn't expect to feel. The simplicity of his logic disarmed me. I laughed softly, feeling the tension begin to dissipate, only to be replaced by another kind of tension. More urgent, more raw. That's a clever solution, I admitted. I'm known for solving problems creatively. His fingers met mine in the space between us. A light touch that sent shivers through my arm. The sensation was surprisingly intimate, considering its simplicity. Can I show you around the rest of the place? He asked, his eyes never leaving mine. We both knew it wasn't just an architectural tour he was offering. It was an invitation, a door opening to something neither of us had planned when we woke up that morning. I'd like that, I replied, my voice huskier than I'd intended. Robert stood and extended his hand. I took it, allowing him to guide me back inside the house. His hands were soft yet firm, hands that shaped spaces for others to live in, so different from mine worn by years of physical work. The house was quiet and softly lit, strategically placed lamps creating a cozy atmosphere. Robert led me through rooms I hadn't seen before. A music room with a grand piano, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a secondary office with a view of the front garden. In each space, he shared little stories. The piano that once belonged to his grandmother, the rare book he'd found at a flea market in Amsterdam, the leather chair he bought with his very first paycheck as a designer. It wasn't just a house he was showing me, I realized. It was his life, open as a book for me to read. And this, he finally said, opening a door at the end of the hall, is my bedroom. The suite was spacious, dominated by a king-size bed with deep blue Egyptian cotton sheets. Large windows opened onto a small balcony, the curtains fluttering gently in the night breeze. The walls were a soft gray, decorated with black and white photographs of urban landscapes. New York, Paris, Tokyo. Robert turned on a bedside lamp, bathing the room in an amber light that softened all the hard edges. Our eyes met, and in that moment, all my doubts felt irrelevant. I moved slowly toward him, giving us both time to reconsider, to step back. But there was no second guessing when my hand found his face, my thumb tracing the outline of his jaw. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice nearly inaudible. His answer was to lean in and press his lips to mine. The kiss started gently, almost hesitantly, but quickly turned into something more urgent. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space between us. The taste of wine on his tongue mixed with something uniquely him, a combination that made my head spin more than any alcohol ever could. My hands slid through his hair, soft in between my fingers, while his roamed my back, tracing patterns that seemed to awaken every nerve ending. Without breaking the kiss, he began guiding me toward the bed. The back of my knees brushed against the edge of the mattress, and we pulled apart momentarily, both breathing heavily. Robert's eyes were dark with desire, his pupils almost erasing his irises. His voice was husky when he said, "Ever since you walked through my door, I haven't been able to stop thinking about how it would feel to touch you." His words awakened something primitive within me. I pulled him in for another kiss, more demanding this time, my hands finding the hem of his shirt and sliding underneath to feel the warm skin of his back. He moaned against my lips, his hands working the buttons of my shirt. One by one, they gave way under his deft fingers until the fabric fell open. Robert stepped back slightly, his eyes roaming over my exposed torso with clear appreciation. "You're even more impressive than I imagined," he murmured, leaning in to place kisses along my collarbone. The touch of his lips on my skin sent waves of heat throughout my body. My hands found his shirt, and in a fluid movement, I pulled it over his head, revealing a body sculpted not by physical labor, but by dedicated swimming and yoga sessions, as he had mentioned over dinner. We tumbled onto the bed, a tangled mass of limbs and heavy breaths. There was an urgency in our movements, as if both of us feared that if we didn't grasp the moment with both hands, it might slip away. Robert's hands were meticulous explorers, mapping every inch of my skin like he was decorating a brand new, precious territory. His palms glided over my shoulders, down my chest, tracing every curve and angle with reverence. I didn't hold back in my own exploration. My fingers discovered a small scar just below his ribs, a birthmark on his hip, the exact texture of the hair on his chest. Every discovery was like uncovering a secret, a new facet of this man who had unexpectedly entered my life. Minutes melted away as our bodies learned each other, the intimacy growing with every touch, every whisper, every sigh. The light from the bedside lamp cast golden shadows over his skin, turning the moment almost dreamlike. And when we finally came together completely, it was like two worlds colliding, the refined, studied world of his and my practical, straightforward one. That collision created something new, a symphony of sensations that transcended our differences. His eyes stayed fixed on mine as we moved in sync, establishing a rhythm that felt as natural as it was inevitable. There was no longer a designer and a service provider, no more social or professional categorizations, just two men discovering a connection that defied easy labels. I lost track of time in that room. It could have been an hour, or several. The outside world ceased to exist. There was only Robert, his eyes, his hands, his body moving in perfect harmony with mine. When we finally reached our peak, it felt like a wave crashing simultaneously on two distant shores, separate in our individuality, but united in that shared experience. His name escaped my lips like a whispered prayer, while his fingers interlaced with mine, grounding us in the moment. Afterwards, we lay side by side, our breathing gradually returning to normal, our bodies glistening with a fine sheen of sweat. The silence between us was comfortable, filled only by the distant sound of leaves rustling in the garden and our synchronized breaths. Robert turned to his side, resting his head on one hand while the other traced lazy patterns on my chest. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. That question made me smile. In the midst of it all, he still cared about me. "More than all right," I replied honestly, though a bit surprised by myself. "Why? I'm not usually so impulsive." I turned my head to look at him. "But something about you shatters all my rules." He smiled, leaning in to press a soft kiss on my lips. "Some rules are made to be broken." We stayed like that for a while, talking in hushed tones, our bodies occasionally touching in gentle caresses. Robert shared stories of his childhood in Chicago, of how he had fought to establish his name in the competitive world of design. I told him about my community college days studying engineering before realizing I preferred working with my hands, about the small business I had built from scratch. Eventually, we dozed off, our bodies entwined as if we had done this 1,000 times before. I woke up with the first rays of sun filtering through the windows. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar room around me. Then, the events of the previous night came flooding back, and I felt a warmth spreading across my chest that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Robert was still asleep beside me, his face relaxed and vulnerable in slumber. I allowed myself to watch him for a few moments, marveling at the unexpected twists life had taken. 4 days ago, he was just another client, a door waiting to be fixed. Now, he was… what, exactly? That question lingered in my mind as I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake him. I gathered my clothes scattered around the room and dressed quietly, needing some space to think. I went downstairs and found the kitchen, where I made coffee using the fancy espresso machine. With the steaming mug in hand, I stepped out into the back garden and sat on the same outdoor sofa where everything had started the night before. The garden looked even more stunning in daylight, vibrant colors emerging with the rising sun. I sat there, sipping my coffee, trying to process the transformation that had occurred in my once organized life. I didn't regret what had happened, not by a long shot. The night with Robert had been extraordinary, transcending any previous experience. But it also raised questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. How would a relationship between us work? Our worlds were so different. He lived in a mansion in an exclusive neighborhood, attended gala events, probably traveled to exotic destinations regularly. I lived in a modest apartment, spent my days fixing broken things, and considered a night out at the local bar with friends on Friday as a big outing. And more importantly, did he even want a relationship? Or had it just been a night of mutual pleasure, a fantasy fulfilled that didn't need to extend beyond sunrise? Do you always wake up this early? I turned to see Robert standing in the doorway, wearing only his pajama pants, his hair adorably disheveled. There was something so genuine in his sleepy expression that I felt my heart race again. Work habit, I replied. I usually hit the road at 6 to beat the traffic. He moved closer, sitting beside me. Were you planning on leaving without saying goodbye? No, I said sincerely. I just needed a moment to think. Think about what? I looked at him, appreciating his directness. There were no games with Robert, no need to decipher hidden meanings. About what happened, about what it means, about what comes next. Robert extended his hand, his fingers meeting mine. What do you want to come next? The question hung between us, loaded with possibility. I looked at Robert's question, feeling its weight. What did I want? That was the question that had haunted me ever since I woke up in his bed. I don't know, I answered honestly, my eyes fixed on the garden awakening in the light. I've been living by rules I made for myself, not getting involved with clients, keeping things simple, predictable. I paused, still feeling his hand on mine. And then you showed up and turned everything upside down. Robert smiled, his eyes catching the golden morning light. Messing things up is part of my job. Sometimes you've got to tear down walls to create better spaces. Design analogies? Seriously? I grinned, feeling the tension ease a bit. Sorry, professional habit. He gently squeezed my hand. Christopher, I'm not asking you to decide our future right now. That would be crazy. We've known each other for less than a week. 5 days, I pointed out. 5 days, he agreed. But I feel there's something here worth exploring. It's not just physical attraction, although. He paused, his eyes running over my body in a way that made me blush. That definitely exists. A blue bird landed by the drinking fountain nearby, watching us curiously before diving into its bath. I stared at it for a moment, envying its simplicity. I'm scared, I finally admitted, the words sounding almost painfully as they left my mouth. Of what? That it might just be a fantasy. The service provider and the rich client. A story that sounds exciting because it's different, but that can't stand up in the real world. Robert was quiet for a moment, his thumb drawing circles on the palm of my hand. I get that fear, he finally said. I won't lie and say there aren't challenges. Our worlds are different. Exactly. But I also think we're simplifying who we are. He looked directly at me. You see me as the rich client, and maybe part of me saw you at first as the attractive service provider. But last night, when we talked about music, literature, our families, it wasn't about labels. It was two people discovering common ground. His words resonated with me, challenging the categories I had built in my head. It was true. In the dinner conversation, there were moments I completely forgot about our differences, absorbed by the way his mind worked, by how he saw the world. And what if it doesn't work? I asked, voicing my biggest fear. Robert shrugged. And if it does? I'm not asking for guarantees, Christopher. I'm suggesting we take this one day at a time. One day at a time. There was something liberating about that idea. No grand promises, no impossible expectations. Just two people seeing where an unexpected connection might lead. Besides, he added with a mischievous smile, you still have a few things to fix at my house. I laughed, feeling the last layer of tension dissolve. Oh, is that it? You just want cheap labor? Not at all. Your hourly rate is outrageous. He leaned in closer. But it's worth every penny. His face was only inches from mine now, his eyes shifting between my lips and my eyes. The silent question hung between us. I leaned in and met his lips with mine. The kiss was different from last night's. Less urgent, more deliberate. A beginning, not a conclusion. When we finally pulled apart, Robert smiled. How about breakfast? I make kick-ass pancakes. Sounds perfect, I replied, realizing I was genuinely hungry. We headed back to the kitchen together, and I watched as Robert navigated the space with ease, gathering ingredients, measuring flour, cracking eggs with one smooth motion that betrayed years of practice. So, you really do cook, I commented from a stool at the counter. Of course. What's with the surprise? I shrugged. We all make assumptions about people. I sort of thought you'd have a personal chef or something. Robert laughed as he whisked the batter. Not even close. I grew up helping my mom in the kitchen. She always said none of her kids would be useless around the house. Wise woman. She was. His smile softened, touched by memories. She'd be happy to know I still use her recipes. We continued chatting as he prepared breakfast. Blueberry pancakes, crispy bacon, fresh coffee. The homeliness of the scene surprised me with its natural ease. There was no strangeness I had feared. Just two men sharing a morning meal with the sun streaming through the kitchen windows. I have a job at 10 in Westridge, I mentioned as I helped wash the dishes afterwards. A ceiling fan installation. Robert nodded. And I have a client meeting at noon. He hesitated, his hands still covered in suds. What do you think about dinner on Tuesday? At your place, this time. The proposal caught me off guard. My apartment is pretty basic compared to here. Perfect. I want to see your space. Where you feel at home. The idea of Robert coming to my small 2-bedroom apartment made me nervous, but also oddly excited. Okay, Tuesday it is. But don't expect anything fancy. I can whip up a mean spaghetti bolognese, that's it. Can't wait, he replied, and the sincerity in his voice pushed away my insecurities. An hour later, I was in my van, driving to my next job. The weekend with Robert seemed almost like a dream, something that had happened to someone else. But the memories were too vivid, the feelings too real to be mere imagination. The following days blurred with work and preparations. I cleaned my apartment like never before, replaced burned-out light bulbs, even bought new dishes to replace my mismatched set. A part of me laughed at these efforts, clearly trying to impress someone whose guest bath was probably bigger than my living room. But another part, a more honest one, realized I wanted Robert to see my world and find it, if not impressive, at least welcoming. When Tuesday arrived, I was inexplicably nervous. I kept checking my phone, half expecting him to cancel with some polite excuse. But at exactly 7, the doorbell rang. Robert was at my door with a bottle of red wine and a simple bouquet of lilies. For the chef, he said as he handed them over. Flowers? That's... I fished for the right word. Surprisingly old-fashioned. I'm a man of classic tastes. He glanced around at my apartment. May I come in, or are we dining in the hall? I stepped aside, suddenly aware of how my place must look from his perspective. The living room with my worn but comfy sofa, the shelf I made myself, the tools meticulously organized in a corner, the small but functional kitchen from which the aroma of a slow-cooked sauce wafted. It's great, Robert said, and I was surprised to see he looked genuinely enchanted. So very you. How do you mean? Practical, functional, everything with its purpose. He ran his fingers along the wooden shelf, and made with your own hands. It's not exactly Architectural Digest. Thank goodness. Those places are beautiful, but no one really lives there. He turned toward me. This is a home, Christopher. I can feel you in every inch. His words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. Wine? I offered, trying to hide the blush rising on my neck. The dinner went surprisingly easily. Robert sincerely complimented my bolognese. Better than Carlo's, that outrageously expensive Italian spot downtown. And we chatted about our days, our projects, childhood stories. He told me about an impossible client who wanted an entire living room in shades of purple, including the ceiling. I shared the story of an elderly lady who made me fix the same light switch 3 times because she liked the company. After dinner, we moved to the sofa with the rest of the wine. Robert sat close enough that our knees occasionally touched, sending little shocks of energy through my body. "Can I ask you something personal?" he asked, after a comfortable moment of silence. "After last weekend, I think we're past formalities," I replied with a smile. "Right." He swirled the wine in his glass, his eyes following the motion of the liquid. "What happened with your last relationship? You mentioned an ex." The question caught me off guard, even though it shouldn't have. It was natural to want to know about each other's romantic pasts. "Amy," I replied after a moment. "We were together for almost 3 years. It ended 2 years ago." "What happened?" I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. "She said I was emotionally unavailable, that I kept parts of me closed off, even after years together." "And were you?" I considered the question honestly. "Probably. I was never good at this." I gestured vaguely between us. "Vulnerability. Intimacy beyond the physical." Robert nodded, without judgment in his eyes. "And before her? A few short relationships. Nothing serious since college." I paused. "And you? I imagine you've left a trail of broken hearts behind." He laughed, though there was something sad in his eyes. "Not as many as you'd think. I had a serious relationship that lasted 5 years. David. We split when I realized we were together more out of habit than love. After that, a few dates. Nothing lasting more than a few months." "Why?" Robert shrugged. "Busy with work. Too picky. Or maybe just waiting for something he couldn't quite define until—" He looked directly at me, "until fixing my door." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. I placed my glass on the coffee table and moved closer, shrinking the space between us. "This is crazy, isn't it?" I murmured. "How fast all of this is happening." "Absolutely irrational," he agreed, his eyes fixed on mine. "We could slow down, play it safe, be sensible." "Totally," I agreed, my hand reaching for his. "Then again," his voice dropped to a nearly whispered tone, "I spent the whole day thinking about kissing you again." "What a coincidence," I replied, leaning in. "I did too." That night, we showed each other another dimension of what we were building. Without the novelty of the first time, we could explore more slowly, more deliberately. I discovered that Robert had a tender spot at the base of his neck, where the right touch made him sigh. He found out I melted when his lips hit the exact spot below my ear. We fell asleep intertwined on my bed, which seemed a bit too small for 2 grown men. Yet somehow it worked perfectly. The weeks that followed established our rhythm. Alternating dinners at our places, messages during the day sharing mundane moments, nights learning the contours of each other's bodies. It was new and exciting, yet surprisingly comfortable, like we'd discovered something that had always been there, just waiting to be noticed. 3 weeks after that first door repair, we were sitting in Robert's garden under the stars, which now felt like old friends. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing my contemplative silence. "About how everything changed so completely in such a short time," I answered honestly. 3 weeks ago, I didn't even know you existed." Robert interlaced his fingers with mine. "And now? Now I can't imagine my life without you in it." The words slipped out before I could filter them, more honest than I'd intended. Instead of pulling back, Robert smiled, that smile lighting up everything around him. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." We talked about our lives, about how they were slowly intertwining. Robert had started leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom. I had a drawer with a few pieces of clothing at his place. He consulted me on repairs for his client projects. I even took him to meet my favorite material suppliers. We weren't rushing anything, but we weren't resisting the natural flow either. We were building something, a sincere word, a quiet morning, a kiss at a time. "You know what I realized today?" I said as we looked up at the stars. "What?" I was fixing a window at the Hendersons, and I caught myself smiling. Without any reason. Just happy. Robert squeezed my hand. "That a bad thing?" "It's terrifying," I admitted. "Because for the first time in a long time, I'm not expecting things to go wrong. I'm not bracing for failure or disappointment. Maybe because it won't happen this time," he suggested softly. I turned to look at him, the man who had walked in through my door and somehow fixed things inside me I didn't even know were broken. "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe some things are simply worth the risk." Robert smiled and leaned in to kiss me under the stars in his meticulously designed garden that now felt a bit like mine too. Isn't it funny how life works sometimes? You wake up one morning thinking it'll be just another day, another job, another door to fix. And then something happens. Something unexpected, unplanned, that changes everything. Sometimes, the greatest transformations start with the simplest moments. A glass of water offered on a hot day. A conversation that goes beyond the professional. A dinner that leads to a connection that defies all expectations. And sometimes, when you least expect it, life doesn't just offer you a door to fix, but a door to walk through. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories with every detail you can imagine are available now. Check the link in the description right now. If you like this story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced an unexpected connection that changed your life. Sometimes, the moments that transform us are the ones we never planned, and I'd love to hear about your experiences too. Until the next story, where I'll keep sharing life's surprising twists when we're open to receiving them.